Yep, this is definitely going to be one of those servants. Demon King Nobunaga, Avenger Nobu, Mommy Dami Nobu, whatever you want to call her. This is one of those controversial servants that you're either just going to be summoning for her because you actually think she's good, you're going to be summoning for her regardless of how good you think she is, just because like you really like Nobu. It's gonna be one of those wars in the comments because I've seen this happen over the past few months. Y'all think I ain't paying attention in the comments, but I see people every now and then talking about like, yes, this servant is good, but I just gotta get my hands on Dami Mommy Nobu. Or I'll also see comments of people being like, nah, Nobu sucks, that's an easy skip for me. So I guess in today's video, I'll try to give you a neutral perspective on Mao Nobu and tell you whether or not she's actually worth summoning for or not. Because truth be told, she's not the worst servant ever released. She's not actually all that bad. They just grossly misdesigned her, in my opinion, and they just left things out that would have made her so much better for really no reason. But if you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel. But if you're feeling extra feisty, you can click that join button to become a channel member if you really like what I do. But with that being said, let's just go ahead and dive right into Nobu and talk about her deck, which really isn't anything super special. She's got a triple buster deck, so they're building her as this almost berserker Avenger, right, to do big, massive amounts of damage. Triple buster deck with 6 hits, 5 on the extra. This girl is here to do some massive damage, but they didn't exactly skip out on her quick and arts cards, but they didn't make them super exceptional either. Because 4 hits on a quick card is pretty good, but her star gen stat is severely lacking at 5.9%. You're going to really struggle to gen any amount of stars with that star gen stat, and even though she has very high hits on her buster cards with 6 each, it's still going to be very hard to gen stars with those with that low of a star gen stat. Now, if you're able to get someone to buff those up and give her some extra star gen, she actually could become a pretty decent star gen with all of that because her hits are so high, but you're going to really have to invest in that if that's what you want to go for, and it just seems like a lot of work to get diminishing return, right? Especially when you could just pair her with someone like Merlin, who will give her stars for free. However, her arts card you actually might be able to get some decent mileage out of. 4 hits with almost 50% NP gen. They scuffed her out of like that 0.01%. Does mean that, I mean, on its own, it's not going to be genning any NP at all whatsoever. But if you can get some crits on it, you can actually gen a decent amount of NP. But she's definitely going to be somebody that's relying on the supports to really help her get her NP back, because they really did overspec her into doing a lot of damage, as is very evident by her deck. Now, looking at her first skill, if you look at this, you're like, alright, this looks like a pretty solid start to a servant. She's getting an increased attack buff every turn for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. So she starts off with a 30% attack buff, then it goes to 50, and then on turn 3, it is a 70% attack buff, which is super massive. I mean, even the 50% on turn 2 is good, because that's basically a mana burst, but for your attack. So even though it's not buffing the card performance, it is buffing all of her cards and all of her damage, like from NP to any card that she clicks, is getting basically a mana burst amount of damage, just without the, like, you know, the arts performance buff or the quick performance buff. So it's still very solid, and then the next turn, bumping that to 70 allows her to do insane amounts of damage. But this often gets overshadowed by the fact that she takes 1000 burn to herself for 3 turns, which, I mean, isn't really all that bad if you consider that you're probably going to be pairing her with Merlin, who's going to basically cancel that out with his own NP. But if you're not considering that, it could be a bit annoying, especially because she doesn't have a whole lot of HP to start with already. She only has 11,000 HP. So losing 1,000 every single turn could be a detriment if you don't have somebody around to kind of counter that out. But she does grant herself Burning Battlefield for 3 turns, which you would think, based on other characters like, say, Gawain or Summer Jean, characters that have these terrain bonuses, and that especially the ones, especially like Gawain, who can grant it to themselves. You're like, this is going to be an integral part of their kit, and surely this is going to mean a whole lot. And no, sorry to rip the band-aid off, but Mao Nobu, or Avenger Nobu, whatever you want to call her, she doesn't really have anything to really take advantage of that burning battlefield. I guess we can move into her second skill, because right now, if you summon for Mao Nobu, all this is going to be an invincibility for 1 turn and a 100% resistance to having her buffs removed for 1 turn on a 6-turn cooldown. which again, that's not bad. It's very good as a survivability skill because it's like, alright, I get my invincibility and it's gonna stick. It also means that like you can't remove her attack buff as it's building up, so that's pretty good. But correctly, they did buff this, so next year when she comes back around for the Guda Guda 4 rerun, they're actually gonna stick on a 50% damage mod against sky attribute enemies while on burning battlefield. So they added a little bit extra to this, giving her extra damage and actually giving her burning battlefield, shtick, an actual purpose, because originally it really didn't do anything. And thankfully, at the very least, the sky attribute niche that she's gonna get next year does, for one, actually help her damage against numerous enemies a lot. Also, spoiler alert, she has an extra damage mod on her NP for like divine enemies. So the fact that they gave her this allows her to like double dip into those buffs and actually really helps her damage out a lot. Because one of the problems that she had when she first came out on JP was people were like, oh, this is nice, Mao Nobu's a very high damaging Avenger, but Jalter though, I already have Jalter, why would I use this lady, right? And keep in mind, we're also in the Scotty meta, so even if you weren't in like the Jalter camp, you're like, okay, that's nice, but I have Edmund Dantes and Scotty, who can pretty much do everything in the game by himself. Why would I need to summon for this, right? That's also considering like people that just weren't summoning for Nobu because they like Nobu. That's everybody else like not being convinced to summon. Because I know there's going to be people in the comments being like, but what about summoning for Nobu because it's not... Okay, not everybody cares about Nobu, alright? There's some of us here that just don't care. Team Okita for life. Anyway, moving on to third skill. This is where I really feel like they dropped the ball with Mao Nobu, because she gives 10 stars per turn and has a 20% battery on a 5-turn cooldown. And you're like, wow, that is really, really underwhelming. This should have either been like 15 stars a turn, 50% crit damage for 3 turns, 30% battery, or they should have just went complete ham taro and slapped a 50% battery on this, because Lord knows that she could use it and it would actually give her a super good niche. Because keep in mind, she's an Avenger. If she had a 50% battery, she would be so useful when it came to farming nodes, because she would have synergy with the event 50% CEs. Being an Avenger means you can pretty much bring her to anything. And the fact that she now has 2 pretty decent damage mods against Divine and Sky attribute opponents, it would just make her so good. And then they fumbled the bag. I mean, 20% gives her synergy with K-Scope, but like I talked about in the Gawain versus Faye Gawain video, you gotta have a K-Scope for that, and that's not exactly common. Even for people that have been playing this game since its inception, most of those people still don't even have their first copy of K-Scope. It's a very tall order to have. And then the 10 stars per turn is just vastly overwhelming. I don't know what they were thinking with this. I don't know if they were like, well, we think her NP gen and her star gen are good enough, so we're just going to give her a little bit of stars and a little bit of NP battery to kind of supplement that. But no, her star gen and her NP gen need to be either better so this skill doesn't look as bad, or this skill needs to get a massive overhaul to complement her already like kind of middling NP and star gen stats themselves. So I mean, like, overall, you look at her skills and you're like, okay, skill 1, I like the scaling attack buff. That's pretty good in and of itself. The burn is really annoying unless you have someone that can offset it. She gives herself burning battlefield, but that literally doesn't do anything at all for her. And keep in mind that before anybody comments about like Berserker Nobu or like Nobukatsu, I know they exist and they do help her out a bit. We're more or less looking at her own skill like cohesiveness and how she works with herself. Because if a servant does need a lot of other utility to make them decent, that's not a good sign. It's a very good sign when a servant themselves is already very cohesive and they already work very well with themselves, and then you bring other servants to make them even better. So I know there are ways you can kind of get around that, but again, we're talking about her own cohesiveness, and for a whole year, that burning battlefield does not do anything for Avenger Nobu. Then they finally buff her second skill a year later to then give her a buff against Sky attribute, and while I do think that's good, you do need to specifically bring her to a Sky attribute battle. Otherwise, that doesn't really do anything still. Like, that first part of that skill doesn't even work at all. Her survivability is fine. Like, I do like the invincibility. You can't really knock that at all. Third skill, I see what they're going for. They're like, her star gen and NP gen aren't the best, but we'll give her a little bit of buffs here and there, but that should have just been way better. I think one of the massive things that she's missing is that she just does not have any in a buff to her crit damage, which I think she could massively benefit from. But I don't know, maybe they just didn't want to put her in the same territory as Jalter or something. I have no idea what they were thinking. She does at least have the good Avenger passive skills. If you've used Jalter, you kind of know how these function. If you just flick Avenger Nobu or someone like Jalter just very lightly, like a small breeze touches them, they gen like 5,000% NP. The problem is that Avenger Nobu does not have a lot of HP to begin with, so you don't really want her taking a lot of damage. So while that can help her gen her NP, it's also kind of bad because she's not very bulky, and she's an Avenger, so that means a lot of people are going to be hitting her for neutral damage, so she's not even like guarding against the damage. She's going to get hurt really bad. They really shafted her on Oblivion Correction because she's only getting 2% crit damage, which, yeah, real thanks there, buddy. Really appreciate the 2% crit damage. That really fixes that problem. But at least she's getting the 3.3% mana per turn, you know, who cares, like, not very nice, whatever. Let's just get to her NP. Her NP, this is where the anti-divine buff comes in, and this is where I'm like, okay, I see this, and I'm like, all right, you're trying to fit her into an anti-divine buff, because she gets 150 to 200% extra damage to divines. She removes all divines' defensive buffs first, kind of like Shiro Amakusa, before she fires her NP. And then she applies burn, which, I mean, whatever, that's a little underwhelming, but it's Nobu. They're going to try to toast people with that, so whatever, I guess I'll take it. But I look at the NP and I'm like, oh, okay, so she's like an anti-divine servant, but it's like, the synergy's just not all there. Like, she's kind of a mismatch, very weird servant, is basically the thing that I'm trying to get across. And she's not bad, it's just her design is wonky. Like, I can't feasibly see myself pulling her out for too many quests, if you kind of get what I'm getting at. Because, again, there's things in her skills that are good. I mean, the attack is good, the invincibility is good, being able to gen some stars and get an immediate battery, that's fine. It's just the values for those are pretty low. They need to give her some sort of buff either on her NP or maybe on her third skill. Maybe her third skill, they could buff it to where, like, if she's on Burning Battlefield, since she grants it to herself, she gets like 100% crit damage for 3 turns. Or she gets, I don't know, 30% extra NP damage, or a 30% Buster buff for 3 turns on NP activates first, as long as she's on Burning Battlefield. They really need stuff to fully take advantage and just dive into Nobu's niche, because right now she's just kind of flimsily designed and isn't really a cohesive unit. Again, yes, there are other Nobu characters that do kind of help her out. You could run like double Nobu Katsu and he really helps Avenger Nobu out. He basically functions like a Merlin specifically for Avenger Nobu, but do keep in mind, he also dies when he does that, so it's kind of like, you gotta dump those buffs onto her and then hope she can finish the fight, otherwise it ain't happening. So for short burst fights, yeah, that's really good and it works, but then what about all the longer fights in the game? Do you just not bring Avenger Nobu? In which case, why are you summoning for a servant you're never going to use? I understand summoning for servants that you like and you just want to have them in your collection. If that's why you're summoning for Avenger Nobu, then pop off, right? Because then you don't care about how good she is. You just want her because you like her. But if you actually are like looking at like, oh, should I summon for her so I can actually use her? Like, what's the point? Do I want to use Avenger Nobu? Then honestly, you're going to have to skip. I mean, I just did a video talking about skipping the Nero Bride 14 million downloads banner because there's so many hype servants coming up after her. I mean, do keep in mind, we're moving into like double summer events. Merlin's going to be in one of those. Da Vinci Lily's coming out for Anniversary, and I know a lot of people probably don't care about her, but she's really good. She's an exceptional servant that's like going to age very gracefully because the arts meta is coming up next. Then for everyone that didn't get Scotty's going to go on Rate Up later on this year. It's just like, if you must have Avenger Nobu, maybe just wait till next year when she gets her buff. Then she actually functions a bit better, but I don't know. Just right now, she's not exactly doing it for me. You got to do a fat skip on this one. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Maybe someone will show me an APT for a turn where they're like, actually, I did 4.6 million damage in this one specific scenario. Therefore, Avenger Nobu good. Who knows? Maybe someone will drop that in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, you guys have yourselves a nice day, and I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Peace. Late, guys.